Welcome to Rising Tides, the business podcast where we explore how business professionals across industries make waves and rise above the competition. Join Angela Merziff and myself, Kim Hayden, as we talk to inspiring business professionals from entrepreneurs to executives about the strategies and tactics they use to get ahead. From their failures to their successes, you'll get an inside look at what it takes to make it in the business world today.
Good morning, everyone. Welcome to another episode of Rising Tides. I apologize, anyone trying to watch this on LinkedIn. I don't know why we can't connect to LinkedIn. I don't believe it's connected, but you can watch the replay after. I'm super excited to talk to our next guest. This is going to be a very interesting conversation, and I just want to take a moment to introduce him. Our next guest is an author, blogger, and branding guru, Kim Rozdeba. He's guided some of the Fortune 500's oldest and most iconic brands. He has over 3 decades of strategic planning, branding, and executing multi-million-dollar advertising and marketing campaigns, and also as well as PR, corporate communications in agriculture, pharmaceutical, petroleum, airline, telecommunication, and the automotive industries. And he recently published his first book called Branding Queens, Discover Branding Secrets from 20 Incredible Women Who've Built Global Brand Dynasties. The book defines branding under 5 key components called the 5 C's of branding, which we'll talk to him about. And he's a local. He resides in Calgary, Canada, with his wife, and he has 3 adult children. And I don't believe we've talked to a local before. Welcome to the show, Kim.
Thank you very much. It's kind of nice to have an audience that's local as well as a host in the same province that I'm in.
Yes, it's amazing to have you on. First time on the show, having a local, which is interesting. Kim, my co-host Kim is not joining us today. I'm flying solo, as you know.
Now, is this because we have the same name and she's
possibly
worried that we're going to get confused? Because I was hoping that if there was a really tough question, I'd go to her and go, well,
right? Which Kim are you asking? Right, exactly. We could throw her some curveballs. We'll have to do that next time you're on, Kim.
Well, I hope she feels better soon.
Yes, me too. But she's pushing all the buttons in the background for us. We had some technical difficulties, but hopefully everything's ironed out now, so we can get the good stuff out of this interview for everybody watching. So, Kim, could you share with us your journey into the world of branding? What inspired you to get started in this field?
Yeah, I'd love to. So it was not a direct route. I don't think anybody's career is a direct route unless you're a profession like a doctor or a lawyer. But even that, I think it somewhat doesn't go in a straight line. So I actually started in the oil and gas industry in Toronto. I went to University of Toronto, the center of the universe, and I decided that would be a good place to start a career. And I started working for British Petroleum, which was bought up by Petro-Canada. And I got into marketing and I loved it. And I did sales promotions. I did the first torch relay. I'm now aging myself. The first torch relay glass promotion. I was an escort runner with the Olympic torch as well. But I really, really was captivated by the whole idea of branding and communicating and marketing. So I actually went from there to an advertising agency. And I worked with BBDO for a couple of years. Then I went to Ogilvy, the 7th largest in the world. I worked on a number of different clients there. I learned a lot from an agency environment. And then I went from there to client side. And so I've been on the client side now for 20 years. So.
Wow, that you're right. Our journeys are never a straight path, are they? But
No.
yeah, there's stepping stones that lead to the next interesting thing. And I think especially if you're a creative person like we are, we're always, interested and intrigued by lots of different things. So that takes us down a winding path usually. But a good one. Ogilvy, like, oh my goodness, that's a huge brand, a huge agency. I'm sure you gleaned a lot of great knowledge and
I
insight
did.
into the world of advertising from them. Um, so tell us a bit about that. You've worked with some iconic brands, Fortune 500 brands. What was a project that stands out, and maybe a challenge on a project that stands out to you, and what did you learn from it? How did you overcome this challenge?
So, I mean, selling gasoline is not, I mean, I look back and I go, really, we were trying to sell gasoline? I mean, it's a necessity. But at the same time, there was technology. We were working with Shell. I'd worked with Petro-Canada on their advertising, so I actually went right from Petro-Canada to actually to the agency that worked on there. So I worked on Petro-Canada as well. But uh, I, what was amazing that I learned is that you can sell anything. And I do a blog, and one of my favorite ones that I wrote was about selling water. You know, where a lot of the water you buy today, right, comes from out of the tap. Okay, they filter it, but it's still coming from the tap, and it's more expensive than gasoline. So
Mm.
I mean, you can create value from anything. And so I found that was probably one of my first learnings is from a gasoline perspective, is that you can actually create value attached to it with technology. And we had a new technology that we introduced into the marketplace. And if you go back in time, one of the most famous commercials from Shell was the distance. They would have the barrier. And for those that are older, they remember these barriers, and you'd measure the Shell gas against other gasolines, and you would go
Mhm.
further with Shell. And that was their positioning for many years. And so we
Mm.
brought it back, and we brought it back, and we tested it. We did everything, we test everything, because these are expensive campaigns that we put out. And we wanted to make sure that we were having a campaign that would resonate with our target audience. And we did a PS, we did testing across Canada, including French Quebec. And we found out that people liked the concept. They understood it, and they actually understood the history attached to it. But it was boring. And I mean, they would watch it possibly once, but we had to go back to the drawing board. And we went back to the drawing board, and we did the same concept. We had the lab, because we had a scientist standing there, explaining the new technology. But we changed the presenter to Leslie Nielsen, the comedic. He's no longer with us. And I mean, at the time, he was very popular. I mean, Airplane was a huge success. His comedic abilities, is legendary. And we had him every time that commercial ran. They sold more gasoline. Amazing.
Yeah, that is amazing. So for a commodity like gasoline, you can get it anywhere. It's basically in the consumer's mind, it's the same everywhere, but it sounds like you used comedy and humor to really make a connection with the audience.
Yeah.
Yeah. I
And
feel like
and that history attached to it, the
yeah.
legacy of the brand itself.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. Um, so you have 3 decades worth of experience in the branding world. How has everything you've worked on, the different agencies you've worked with, the client-facing business you have now, how has all that shaped your, approach to branding? And what does your approach consist of?
So it's really watching and listening, but listening is probably half of it. I mean, when we start asking questions of anybody, they tend to go to the rational side of the brain, uh, and you don't get the full answer. So one of the words I use a lot in my the team that works with me will go, yeah, this is a trait that you'll see from Kim would be why. why? And it's not asking it just once, but many times until you really get to the why. And so to understand your audience is a lot of just watching of how they do it as opposed to what they say they do. And
Mm.
I would spend time, depending on the customer, in their environment, wherever the transaction is going to take place. I would spend days. I would spend days with the people that are actually interacting with the customer, is also to see how that interaction takes place. Is there friction? Is there what does really happen when that transaction takes place? And then when does they actually experience the product? So it's really being somewhat. When I was a kid, I wanted to be an archaeologist, and for some reason, I think this is what I kind of do. Like this is what we do, as particularly from an advertising perspective and a marketing perspective, is understanding the customer better than they can understand themselves. And so, and have to work with different pieces of information, and try to peel it back to figure out exactly what is this telling you.
Yeah, right. It's a lot of psychology and understanding
Yeah.
human behavior, and we can only understand so much from data, numbers, pie charts, and things like that. I think getting out there in the real world and
Well, it puts it in
watching people.
context. It
It
actually,
does.
you can use it
Does it?
still. It's still really important, but it put it in context of going, oh, I now understand why that happens.
Mhm. Right, because, the thing with focus groups is, um, people will try and behave in a way that they wanna they want to give the answer that they think you want to
Yeah.
hear. So
Yeah.
that's why I don't really love focus groups, but something like, being a mystery shopper for a brand, where they don't know they're being watched, I think gives you a lot more insights, a lot more correct insights
Yeah.
into the brand.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I have one more question about your background here. So you've worked with a lot of industries such as agriculture, pharmaceuticals, petroleum, like we just talked about, the airline industry, telecom, and the automotive industry. How would you say that brand strategy differs between these diverse sectors, and is there any commonalities as well between them?
The consumer.
Mm,
We are all human beings. We come certain aspects. B2B, I would say there are some aspects that are different, but at the end of the day, they're still consumers. And so we have, different demographics. We have a number of different things that influence how we think. But as a
mhm,
consumer, the process of how we evaluate and how we interact with each of the brands that we interact with each day starts out really similar. So,
mm,
whether it's a car, there are, certain things that you will look for or you will associate with a car that may be very different from a gasoline purchase, or from from an agriculture, from a food perspective. But we're still touching the same consumer, and we're having to have, I talk of the 5 C's.
mhm,
Those 5 C's exist with every brand.
mm. Yeah, we'll have to talk more about the 5 C's of branding. So, um, let's hop into that and talk about that because I know you have your own framework. Everybody
Yeah,
that does branding, I have my own framework. I'd love to hear more about yours. You mentioned the 5 C's of branding. Could you briefly explain each C and
sure.
how they can be used to build a successful brand?
Yeah, I'd love to. So the first one I have, and these are in no particular order, is commitment, and that's the why. And I can get further into what I mean by why, but the next one is construct, and that's the what attached to the brand. And then the third one is community. Some people think, oh, I thought it was going to be customer. Customer is part of your community, but that's not the only part of your community you should be focusing on. And the next one is content. And content is all of those communication touch points. This is your marketing. This is all, but it's more than just marketing. You may have influencers within your organization that are not part of your marketing team. Your most senior person, the founder of the company, has a position to play in building that brand. So it's much bigger than just marketing. The final one is consistency, and consistency is, how do you replicate? How do you do it every single time? So every action, reaction, or every transaction that you have with the brand is it consistent? All of the pieces, so it goes right down to your specifications. It goes down to your specs, from logo specs to your color palette to your tonality, but it goes even bigger than that. It's the quality of your product. How do you have, what are your quality assurances? Where's your supplier? How do you get them up to speed to make sure they're always going to be delivering? So it gets quite complicated in this end, and data becomes really important too.
Yeah. I know I read an article about consistency in branding that talked about just being consistent alone in your branding. Like you talked about the colors and people recognizing who you are and the way you do things. That alone will boost your revenue by some 25%. So just consistency alone, one of the pillars of your 5-point framework here.
I have a great example of consistency from the book Branding Queens, and it was actually from Oprah Winfrey. And Oprah said for many years she was not a brand. She said, "No, I am not a brand. I'm out there. I interview people. I have a show. I have an opinion, but I'm not a brand." And eventually, she understood what a brand was, and consistency was the important part of what she understood of a brand. And she goes, "I am consistent, so therefore I am a brand." And that was the turning point for her to actually realize that she was a brand, because she has been consistent throughout all of what she has done in her career.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. I think there is a misconception out there as to what a brand is, and now we're getting into the world of personal branding, which I don't know. I mean, you have decades of experience with these top-notch agencies like Ogilvy. Was personal branding, is that a new concept, you feel like, or is that sort of been around
Yeah,
always?
I have an interesting perspective on personal branding,
Okay.
and it actually comes from a quote that I saw a long time ago, and it was, brands are trying to become more like humans, and
Mhm.
humans are trying to be more like brands.
Oh,
And
perfect. I love that quote.
because a brand it's a box of cereal. It's not three-dimensional in the sense of, it has every capacity that a human being has, emotions, it has construct. When I go back to the construct, it has it's replicated perfectly every day. Now, if you're a person that has a business that you are service oriented, well, then maybe you should have some of that. But how far do you go to become a brand? So to me, that's the question of how far you have to go to be a brand. And I don't think a lot of people need to go that far. They may need a really good resume to get a presence. They have maybe a presence in the social environment, because people are looking for connection points to figure out, is this the right person? And so I find that brand is maybe overused from a personal perspective. But if we actually try to replicate what a true brand is and a person, I mean, there are few people, and there are 3 people in Branding Queens that are brands. Martha Stewart is another one, and she
Yeah.
keeps reinventing herself, and her followers allow her to do that. The other one was Queen Elizabeth II, and very structured. We saw what they wanted us to see. We don't know her personal life. We don't know a whole bunch about her. She spoke once every year. And that one time she would speak was 15 minutes. Outside that, she did, thank yous, and she did, small little speeches, which were all choreographed. Her image was on every, still today on our money and all over the place, on stamps. So those were true brands. I don't think as a person I want to be a brand, because I don't want my personality to be boxed into a box.
Mm. Yeah, good
Because the
point.
consistent becomes really important. And you have to give up part of your life to be a brand. And that's what you find with a lot of these people, particularly famous people, when they start building, a genre that they're comfortable with. Well, if they break out of that, people are confused.
True. Yeah, I see it with musical artists all the time. They'll go and do a different style, and their audience is confused because it's,
And
and
sometimes they
that's
won't let them.
yeah, sometimes they won't let them. That's another different subject, I guess, but that's probably why they break out of the band that they're in and then start a solo career under their name, because it's almost like a different brand at that point, right?
Building a brand is hard.
Yeah.
That's why you have agencies, you have experts. There's
Yeah.
experts all over the world. So to expect every person to have that knowledge base to become a brand effectively, I'm going, just do the things that you need to do to make your customers happy. That's good enough.
Right.
If you're consistent with what you're doing with your customers, if you've got 10 customers, do you have to be on social? I don't know. How many customers do you want? Do you want the world? Okay, that's different.
Right.
But I think most
Right.
of us don't need the world. We need just the customers that we're going to be working with. And those people need to understand what you represent.
Right. And customer service, that's never going away. Everyone
No.
wants a great delivery of whatever it is you're doing and great experience, right? How you make them feel. And I know that was one of your quotes when when we got you on the show, is like, it's not what the brand does or says, but it's how it makes its customers feel. And if you
Right.
just keep that in mind, that's just the most simplest definition of branding.
I think we
Right.
put way too much pressure on people to believe that they have to be a brand, that they have to be out there, with content and be leaders, and certain people, yes, absolutely. If that's part of their gig, if they're an author, you got to be out there.
Yeah.
But do you have to really be so structured as a brand? That's the question I have.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Like you say, work backwards from what do you need? How many customers, clients do you need in a year, and work backwards from that. And, you're never going to compete with the Shells of the world and,
No.
the airline industries and that. You're not going to compete with what they do put out for marketing and advertising. So, for you, if you're a small business owner, if you're a solopreneur, it's going to look a lot different. But that consistency, do people know what it is you do? Are they talking about you in the right way, in the way that you would want them to talk about you, not only your reputation, but like, what is it you do? Is it confusing, right? Or is it clear? And those are kind of the building blocks of creating a memorable brand, one that gets shared, and then that brings in the types of clients that you want.
The
Right.
20 women that are in the book Branding Queens all started not thinking about a brand. All they were obsessed with was providing the best product to their customer. In many cases, they understood their customers better than anybody because they were actually their customer. And that's where they started. They obsessed with getting the best product possible. And I think any entrepreneur, that's where they start.
Yes.
The brand
Absolutely.
comes later.
Absolutely. We're usually trying to solve a problem that we solve for ourselves, and a previous version of ourself is usually our target audience, our target
That's right.
customer, right?
In many
Typically.
cases.
It reminds me of that, they had a movie on Netflix a while back, and maybe it's still on, called Self-Made, the story of Madam C.J. Walker.
Madam C.J. Walker, she's in the book too.
Oh, okay, lovely. I need to read your book. Well, let's talk
Yeah.
about your book. So the name of it is Branding Queens. What was your motivation behind writing it?
So it actually started with the first branding queen that's in the book, and that is Barb Nicole Clicquot. Now, Clicquot, Veuve Clicquot, is the champagne. And I had read a book. I didn't realize that Veuve Clicquot was started by a woman. Actually, it was her and her husband. Her husband passed away quite young. He had yellow fever. This was back in the 1800s. And she continued the business. She didn't have to. I mean, she was wealthy. She was an aristocrat. She could have stayed. She had a daughter, a young daughter at the time, but she was just as passionate as her husband of building this business. And they hadn't built it to a point yet of commercialization. So she continued on. And I did not know this. And the other thing I did not know, what the word veuve translated in English, and it's widow. So on the bottle is Widow Clicquot. And I started going, why would you put widow on a brand? So that was my question, and I had no answer. So I started to do my investigation, and you'll have to read the book to find the answer. Okay. But that was the start. And I started going, are there other women out there that I'm not aware of that started, iconic brands or built iconic brands? And I came up with 20. It goes back 200 years. And the youngest one is about 20 years.
Wow. Yeah, there's your why again. Asking that question, why? You and my 6-year-old would get along really well.
Yeah, I guess I never lost it when I was a kid.
I guess not. Except I don't have answers to a lot of his whys. Like, why do we have a nose, Mommy? I don't know. We just do. Yeah. So what was the most interesting or inspiring story as you were researching these women? What stood out during your research?
This is the hardest question because they all stand out to me. That's why they're in the book. Every time I started going down, one of these, I'm going, I didn't know that. Sure, there's some famous women that are in here. Coco Chanel, Liz Claiborne, Anita Roddick of The Body Shop. But what was interesting is how they got into the business. Most of these women had no formal education. One of the traits that I discovered and there was several that are very common amongst all of these women, and maybe most entrepreneurial women, I don't know, was this ability to learn. And okay, maybe they were asking lots of whys, I don't know, but they came at it really going, I know nothing. I'm going to start a cosmetic company. We'll go to CJ Walker. And she was a washerwoman. So she washed clothes for households. Her parents were slaves. And she started a business, and her business was hair products. One of the problems was there were no running water bathrooms. There were outhouses at that time. So a lot of women didn't wash their hair very often, in particular Black women, and their hair would fall out. So she came up with a product, and the product, she was not a chemist. There was different, types of products that were out there, and she actually was able to put one together. And she started there. What was really interesting when she started is she started with a cause, a purpose. And her purpose was to help other Black women, not only with because if you think of one thing about any person, your facial representation, your hair, your how you look is really important. So she started there in helping other women, but along the route, she also got women to work with her. So she got agents, and this is a similar model to Mary Kay. Mary Kay is another one that's in the book, where she was helping other women as well. So CJ Walker, she started off training these women. And when I say training, she actually had a university that she put together, because she understood she had to train them in a number of different aspects, not just selling or being, in business, but, just hygiene and how to dress appropriately. She started off helping, empowering Black women across the United States and across North America. So, I mean, that is an incredible story. And she says the Netflix is about 50% accurate. The other 50 is definitely, it's a movie set in the
Right.
sense of they had to create some sort of dialogue or some conflict in the show, so it did deviate from it. But I can talk about each one of these women and tell you stories that I just go, wow, and some of these are very strong-willed women. But what's really interesting is, I often say, would I be able to have worked with some of these women? I don't know. I don't know if I'm good enough to have worked with some of these women. Their expectations are extremely high. And what's interesting is people would come and go because they couldn't live up to that expectation. But there is a core group of people in all of these cases where they stayed from day one till when they left the business or passed away. And in some cases, they were in their will. I mean, it just showed you how close and family knit some of these organizations and companies were.
Yeah, and to be able to share your vision and have people, the right people, come alongside you on that journey.
Yeah.
It sounds like these women, had that strong vision and they were relentless in pursuing it. And they thought big, right? Like creating a university
Huge.
to train women at that time when, when women weren't doing any of that stuff at all. I mean, that's thinking massively in that day and age.
Today we hear of, caring brands. It's a relatively new concept. I mean, relatively new in the last, I would say, 10 years. What's amazing in a lot of these cases, they were caring brands. Bissell and Bissell. So that's the Bissell carpet cleaners. I mean, we have the little one that shampoos, because I mean, every time there's a wine spill or something, we get that sucker out. It's awesome. She was one of the first, going back in 1876, to have benefits for her employees. So, I mean, there was all these different things that come along that go, wow, they understood when you talk about community, the depth of, not just your customer, but your employees. Liz Claiborne, who's the designer, had a clothing business, and she had separates. So one of her claim to fame was coming up with separates and having them all together, instead of having just all the dresses over there, all the jackets over there, all the pants over there. It was all together, and they were all color coordinated, so you can mix and match. So it was perfect for the women that were going into the business world in the 60s. She, in her office, the employees, they would have a phone list of all their employees. So, you could call each other, in the office around just first names. It's a small thing, but it tells you a bit about the people that are running these organizations.
Right. It sounds like they had a strong grip on what their culture was or what they wanted it to be and built everything around that. How do you want to make people feel, both your employees and your customers, and build a business that way? I think that hasn't changed for today, building a business today as well. Well, we have to talk about, because the Barbie movie has come out and it's so popular, we have to talk about the inventor of Barbie. I know she's featured in your book. Can you talk to us about her and how
Yeah,
her creation
yeah,
came to be?
yeah. Ruth Handler. So she started with her husband. He was a designer. He designed furniture, and they moved to Hollywood, to LA, and he was designing this furniture. And at that time, there was the acrylics, so all these plastics, and he was designing these, interesting furniture. And the leftovers, they would make frames, picture frames with that. He was always trying to use all the product. And she worked actually for one of the film companies. I'm not sure which one, I can't remember now. And when she had her lunch breaks, she would go out and try to sell these things. So she was the salesperson, he was the designer. And that's kind of how they took the whole Mattel
Mm.
business. And they discovered with all the little leftovers, and they were starting to make picture frames, and those were actually better than the furniture. So they started there, and then actually started building things, for kids. And that started really going really well as well. And that's when they started Mattel, and they started actually looking at building things for kids, toys. Barbie came along, I think it was, well, it'd be about 60 years ago. And they were actually, the story goes that she had watched her daughter, who was named Barbie, uh, playing with her friends, and they would play with these paper dolls. And one of the things that Ruth noticed was most of the dolls that they played with were babies, not any reflection of the future, but of the past, of being a mother, nurturing, children. And she was kind of looking at, listening to her daughter, and they were talking about the future, not about looking after a baby. So that was kind of an idea that was in her head. And when they were over in Europe, they were on a family vacation. She found this doll, and this doll was a woman. It was a anatomically correct woman doll, and it replicated it was a cartoon character, and I think it was in Germany.
Yeah.
So she brought back a couple of those, and that became sort of the starting point for Barbie. And when she designed, finally they designed it. It took a couple of years. Went to the major toy show to see if she could get any representation of companies and stuff, and nobody was interested. Going, this is too advanced. Kids aren't going to
Yeah.
play with this. Girls aren't going to play with it. So she actually marketed herself. And the other incredible thing that she did, and again, very savvy, is she marketed it at almost like a loss leader. So, I mean, at the time, it was $3. And again, at the time, because she understood that the clothes and all the accessories is where they would make the money. So it's kind of like your printer. You make the money on the ink, not necessarily on the printer. And so that was her strategy moving forward. The other really interesting thing she did was she marketed to kids. She took literally all the money they had made and bought a property on Walt Disney. There was a show before, the kids show, and I'm trying to remember the name now. It escapes me. But she spent basically all of their profits in this advertising campaign, and she bought beyond, because at that time they only advertised kids' toys in Christmas. She did all year round. So that was another thing that she changed,
Mm.
the whole marketplace. So, I mean, I could go on and on about all her brilliance, but I'll tell you one other story, because this story I think a lot of people know. As the business was going on, they were buying out a number of other toy companies. They were looking for manufacturings again in Asia to support the business, and they were looking again, buying a whole bunch of companies. They got into trouble. She had a president. She was the chair of the board, but there was a president who was running the organization, and they had misled the marketplace. They had too many sales on the books that really weren't there. And she left the company, unfortunately, with sort of a stain on her credibility, and so did the president after that. She was I think she was 60. Okay, you would think, okay, she took her millions. I think it was about 18 million she got out of there, her and her husband, in shares out of the company. She could have just went off into the sunset. She didn't. She had breast cancer. She had a mastectomy of one of her breasts, and she discovered that the prosthetics that were in the marketplace, she said it was like having two left shoes. So she started a business. I think it was called Nearly Me, and she started a business developing prosthetics for women with breast cancer, and she continued that business until I think she passed away. She did die of cancer. She had 2 mastectomies, and I go, wow, this is the type of women that are in this book. They don't give up. And I think, Angela, you mentioned before, one of really interesting thing, these women had nobody to follow. So, and nobody believed what they were going to do was going to be successful. They were told they were crazy. You can't do this. So they had to believe themselves all the way.
Yeah, they did. They did. And again, that's you too. If you're building a business, you've got to believe in yourself. You're you're that person building that dream that you see, you envision it, right? You have to be the one that believes in yourself. And luckily we have all these examples now, right? Of these great business owners, entrepreneurs, women that have gone on before us that we can learn from. They really didn't have anything to look to.
Who would have thought this doll would still be relevant today? And I mean, bigger than anyone could have imagined. I mean, if I was the marketing person, I'm going, I couldn't accomplish this. To have a show, a movie that is sold out every day. I was talking to somebody in New York yesterday, and he goes, I'm trying to get tickets for my wife because she really wants to go. We're going to do a Barbie night. And he said, but I can't get tickets.
Yeah, I know. Right? And this is decades and decades later. How much of that would you say is on point branding versus luck? Because some people looking at that would go, well, they just got lucky. They were, did this in an era when.
So again, if you read some of the biographies of some of these women, luck played a role, absolutely. And I think most entrepreneurs today will say, yeah, there was some luck there. I met this particular person who did this. I mean, I think there is, but
I think it's also about being opportunistic too and seeing that opportunity. Not everyone has those eyes to see, but entrepreneurs seem to have that gift to be able to see that opportunity and pounce on it fearlessly, right?
Yeah.
Oh, man. Well, I could talk to you all day. Go ahead. Yeah, they're risk takers for sure. You have to be.
But and sometimes they took risks and they failed, but they got up. And as I said, there's others that had situations that I mean, Martha Stewart with her legal situation that she was in, and she could have just disappeared.
Yep, absolutely. And it doesn't always work out the first time. It's was it Thomas Edison that invented the light bulb? He didn't work the first, bazillion times that he tried it. Thankfully he kept going because I like having indoor lighting in my house. But or like the creator of the KFC, I think he was in his 70s when he built that chain. So it's never too late. Or
I'm just thinking of the vacuum cleaner, and it's again, the name escapes me, the most revolutionary one that's out there right now.
Dyson?
Dyson.
Dyson.
that was, I think, model 100 and something.
Yeah,
So,
exactly. Exactly.
it didn't happen the first time. It didn't happen the second
No.
time.
But we don't always see that, so we get
No, we
discouraged.
don't.
We don't always see these overnight successes. We just see the success part. We don't see everything else that came up before it to build up
Yeah.
to that day,
Yeah.
right? So that's the thing. It's like you never know how close you are. If you have something you believe in, right, and that you know that the market needs and that fills a void in the marketplace, it's up to you to believe in it and keep going,
And
right?
you
You
have
can
to
do
be
it.
gutsy. I mean, there's
You do.
if you've got a second, I'll tell you this one other story. And this is Estee Lauder. So, I mean, she wanted to get her product. She didn't have any stores, her product that she had started developing. And she wanted to get into Saks Fifth Avenue, biggest, cosmetic main floor department. And she talked to the head of the market, and the guy said, well, if my customers ask for it, then absolutely, I'll give you some space in our store, but nobody's asking for your products. She said, okay,
Hmm.
thanks. So a couple of weeks later, she's speaking actually across the street at a women's function, a luncheon. And she, at the end of it, says that she'd like to give everybody as a token of appreciation, lipstick. She said, you're going to have to go to you'll have to go to Saks to ask for it.
Good one. Yeah, exactly. You have to be a little bit daring, a little bit bold, a little bit different, take an angle that other people aren't taking and just go for it, right? That's kind of the
Yeah.
common thread here that I'm hearing. But yeah, I could talk to you all day. I could listen to your stories all day, but we should probably wrap it up.
Well, or you could just buy the book.
Just buy the book, everybody. I know I'm going to. So I'm assuming it's sold everywhere books are found.
Yes.
Kim, okay.
And if you're actually in Calgary, it's actually sold at the Core, at the Indigo. They have copies there. They have hard copies and soft copies there as well. The bookshelf on 4th, and then the one in Inglewood there as well, and West Hills. Out in West Hills, the Indigo there has copies there too. So
perfect. Well,
so
check it out.
easy to get copies if you're in Calgary. Outside that, Amazon.
Amazon.
As I said, Indigo online also has it. So
perfect. Yes, everybody check those out. And where else can people find you online? Where can they connect with you if they want to learn more about you?
LinkedIn is probably the best place, or you can just go Google me. You'll get me fairly quickly, or you can just Google Branding Queens. I have a website. I have a blog if you want to follow the blog as well. That's on branding. And that's just Rozdeba, ROZDBA.com.
Perfect. And I think we've got all your socials listed here. Well, thank you, Kim. It's been a pleasure talking with you and hearing all your stories. I love it. I could talk forever, but I'm going to go check out the book.
And I could talk forever too.
Yeah, it's been awesome. I hope we have you on again. And thank you for your time today. Everybody, we'll see you next week on the Rising Tides podcast. Take care.
Thank you.
This show is sponsored by Be Bold Branding. Kick that yawn-inducing mission statement to the curb. Visit BeBoldBranding.ca and grab your Bold Manifesto workbook to create a bold message that connects. Thank you for joining us here at Rising Tides, your business podcast. Be sure to like, subscribe, comment, and share, and you can